Alrighty, you guys, welcome to my second ever SFS live stream. Today I've got some topics I want to go over with you guys regarding some stuff that we've got going on here this week. But the majority of this video I want to be guided by you guys, so I'm going to spend most of my time answering your guys' questions and going over stuff that you want to hear about. So starting off the bat here, I see that we've got some questions already from some people who are sitting around in the waiting lobby. So we've got Eric wondering, how big is BDN? And it's a little bit of an inside joke for those of you guys that are Bears fans out there, but we don't talk about the BDN. So anyways, now into some serious stuff for fantasy. We've got Reed Faldy. What's up, Reed? You've been a very true supporter here on the channel. He asks, JT, Swift, Gibson, or Hunt this week? Pick three. So my initial thoughts on this scenario here is that I would go JT, Swift, and Hunt because I do not like Gibson this week against the Steelers because that run stop has been very nasty against running backs. But you need to keep an eye on DeAndre Swift because as of today, he is still in the concussion protocol. So I would be careful about that and wait to see what happens later on in the week with him. Otherwise, I really like Swift and Hunt this week, as well as Jonathan Taylor. He also mentions he has traded Alvin Kamara and gotten Keenan Allen, Hunt, JT, and he has Cook. I'm not a huge fan of trading Kamara, but I think what you got back in return is pretty nice. Right now with Taysom Hill, he's a pretty big risk. And actually, one of the things I want to talk about in today's stream is Alvin Kamara. I think that he's obviously one of the top players in fantasy football right now. But with Drew Brees off the field, his production has been way down, and that's certainly not something that can be denied. So I think for the foreseeable future, until we see Drew Brees on the field, you guys are going to have to be content with some dip in production from Kamara. But I think the second Drew Brees walks back onto the field, which we are expecting to be week 14 from an optimistic viewing standpoint here, I really hope he does come back because that's going to shoot Kamara's value right back through the roof. And he's going to be that top-end player. So, and then what's up, Reed? You say you've been here since 300 subs. I think you've been here before that, man. I think you were here way back around like 50 or 100 if I remember correctly. But should I trade Hop for McLaurin? You know, that's an interesting scenario. I think Hopkins, his value is down a little bit right now because of what happened last week against the Pats. And I think there's certainly some things working against DeAndre Hopkins right now and some things that are definitely concerns. Kyler Murray's AC joint sprain in his shoulder is definitely a big issue. I'm not sure how much zip he can get on those balls anymore. I think he's definitely, when he's healthy, he's one of the best quarterbacks for fantasy out there, and him and Hopkins have been great all season long. And McLaurin, we know we're getting a great player who is not quarterback dependent. I mean, we've seen him produce with guys like Kyle Allen, Dwayne Haskins, and Alex Smith. So he really hasn't been dependent at all on who's the quarterback for his team. But to actually answer the question, I think if you're betting on Kyler Murray returning healthily, I think that is the way to go. But he does have some ugly matchups. I don't think Hopkins is going to do too hot this week against the Rams or Murray. But I think McLaurin is pretty matchup proof as well. So I think you could certainly entertain this. But obviously, if situations were perfect, DeAndre Hopkins would be the better option. Swift for Connor. So if you're getting DeAndre Swift in return in this trade, I'm surprised some of you guys' trade markets are still open because the majority of those closed recently. So I think I would take Swift any day of the week over James Conner right now. That schedule is pretty difficult for the Steelers coming up here in terms of the run stops they have to play, and I really like DeAndre Swift's versatility, so I like that option. Would you start Antonio Gibson or Michael Thomas this week? I think this week you go Michael Thomas, especially if you're in PPR. Maybe you think twice about this if you're in a standard league, but Michael Thomas, 9 for 104, I believe, off the top of my head, against the Falcons just 2 weeks ago. And I think that that's definitely the guy they're looking to get the football to right now. He had a bit of a down week last week, but like I said in a previous video, the Broncos just got absolutely saints, and Taysom Hill only had 78 yards passing, and Michael Thomas had 50 of those. So definitely a good sign for Michael Thomas owners, despite the low production because of how many of the yards he got that were actually out there to have. What else do we got here? Standard scoring, start Jefferson and McLaurin over MT. Yeah, in this situation, I think I would go with Jefferson and McLaurin over Michael Thomas. I really like Jefferson against the Jags this week, and I think that he has some great opportunities to put up some nice numbers. And then McLaurin, if the Washington offense can pass protect Alex Smith, I think he's in for a huge day, because that one weakness we've seen in that Steelers defense has been their secondary, and they have allowed the big play, which is what Terry McLaurin does so well. So I really like all three of those guys this week, but I think Jefferson and McLaurin are your best options. You have Adam Thielen, Jefferson. Should you keep them? So you've got both of the guys on the Vikings offense here, basically. You're wondering if you should keep them or trade one of them. I think the rest of the season, let me go in and check the Vikings schedule out here. I believe it's somewhat decent. Fantasy playoffs, they've got Tampa Bay week 14, Chicago in week 15, and New Orleans week 16. So I think maybe I'm a little bit concerned about Tampa Bay. Obviously, their defense has been down a little bit, but coming off a bye week and 2 straight losses for Brady, I think that team will be on point. And then week 16 in that championship game against New Orleans, who was a very bad passing defense to start off the season, but has really cleaned things up and been a high-level stopping unit. So I think you would definitely look to move off one of those guys. I really like both of them, but maybe having 2 players from the same team in your starting lineup might be a little bit more risky than you'd like. Thoughts on Chris Carson this season or this week and moving forward this season? I really like Chris Carson. He's a guy who has gotten a lot of touches in games over the past couple of years here, and the one thing that's really held him back is injuries, but he gets his done on the air, or through the air and on the ground, and Chris Carson gets in the end zone as well. So I really like him. Let me check on Seattle's schedule really quick here. Seattle's got the Jets in the fantasy playoffs, Washington, and the Rams. I think the Rams might be a little bit problematic in that Week 16 championship game for many leagues, but I think overall he's just a guy who's going to get his work, and unless they're really getting blown out, I think has a really great value. So do you trade Dalvin Cook for DeAndre Swift and another piece in Dynasty? This is a very interesting question. I actually haven't done too much Dynasty stuff at all on the channel here, especially because I mainly got started up here during the regular season. But in the offseason here, that is definitely something I'm looking to do. I'll be talking a lot of Dynasty and getting into a lot of trade stuff. But basically, my answer for you right now, Rowan, is I would look to keep that offer on the table, and I would see what happens in the offseason, because if the Vikings tear down and try and start a rebuild here, I think that maybe you don't want to be involved with Dalvin Cook, but he's definitely one of the more talented backs in the league, and one of the only red flags about him is his injuries. So obviously when he's on the field and when that team is competing, this is probably a top 3 running back in fantasy for the next couple of years here. So, but I really like DeAndre Swift as well, and I think the Lions are trying to trend up right now, even though they obviously haven't been turning things into the win column lately. So I would hang on to that one. I definitely would not accept that at this time. Don't give away Dalvin Cook right now. Drop Salvin Ahmed for Joe Mixon stash. I think that's viable. I think that we know if Joe Mixon comes back onto the field, I don't know how likely it is that happens. I think he's definitely better than Ahmed. With Myles Gaskin coming back, I expect that workload to be shaken up a little bit, and we're going to see quite a bit more Gaskin than we will see Ahmed, even though he was pretty impressive in his 2 starts rather. But Joe Mixon, I don't know if they're going to bring him back. I really hope they do, because he was a guy I was super excited about at the trade deadline for many fantasy leagues. He was a guy who was getting great work this season. It was like 23 touches was his lowest amount in a game this season. It was pretty darn impressive. So Joe Mixon, if he comes back, would be great, but I don't know how willing the Bengals would be to do that, since that they're definitely not competing anymore, and with Joe Burrow already out for the season, I think they might not be too competitive. What's up, Roy Kim? See you here. What's up, Lucas? J.K. Dobbins is an RB2 after the Titans game. So that was my thought. I thought J.K. Dobbins, definitely a safe guy going forward. The thing that really impressed me about Dobbins in that game against the Titans was how many touches he saw despite Mark Ingram being healthy and on the field and having Gus Edwards there, because prior to that point in the season, we only saw a triple-headed RB by committee type role there. So that was definitely encouraging. I've been waiting for Dobbins to pop all year. I thought it would have happened much earlier on in the season, but we've taken some time here, and obviously Baltimore's had some things shaken up on their roster right now. I think definitely something that hurt him was the COVID cases and not being able to play last week, so I think that makes things a little bit more murky. But J.K. Dobbins going forward, I think, is definitely a viable flex play at the least. So I would give him another week and see if he can produce those numbers again. But then going forward after that, I would be excited about him. What should I do with Allen Robinson, Cooper Kupp, Chris Godwin, and Devontae Parker? They are riding my bench. Same with JT and Melvin Gordon. So sounds like you've got a pretty deep roster here if you've got all those guys on your bench. Nick, I don't know if your trade market is still open right now, but if it is, I would definitely look to package up some of those guys and go after a player that would be more useful to your team. I really like Allen Robinson, though, so I would definitely try and keep him around. But Godwin, Kupp, Parker, they're solid players, but guys I think you can move off of. Probably the best one to hold on of the group would be Allen Robinson, and then I would say Godwin is your next best valuable guy. Pick 3 non-PPR, Swift, Aaron Jones, Gallman, or Gaskin. This week, definitely going to go with Aaron Jones. I know a lot of people have been panicking on him because he hasn't been showing those high ceiling games lately, but his touches are still there. He's just had some tough matchups. I mean, Chicago, they were blowing him out too, so then Jamal Williams came in the game and got, I believe, 17 carries in that one. So Aaron Jones definitely still a guy I'm high on the rest of the season. I like Gallman again this week, assuming that he is going to be the lead back there, and no Freeman again this week against Seattle. I'm not sure if he's even eligible to return off the IR this week, so I think Gallman is actually going to for sure get all that workload. I think that's great against the Seahawks. The only thing that would concern me is if Daniel Jones doesn't play, they might get kind of blown out. So in the event that happens, I think that he might not see as many touches. And then Swift, if he goes over that concussion and he's able to play this week, I love him in all matchups. He's super dynamic and a guy I think has great fantasy value. So those are the 3 I'd go with. But if, say, Daniel Jones isn't to play or Swift is ruled out, Gaskin's a fine option as well. But I just have a little bit of caution with Gaskin because of his first game back from an injury. Pick 3, Chris Carson, CEH, DeAndre Swift, Raheem Mostert, and Myles Gaskin. So I'm definitely going to go with Chris Carson this week. Last week, he didn't get too many carries, but in his first game back, I kind of expected that, and I think he'll get his workhorse numbers back here. Then after that, I think we got to go Mostert. He showed that he can produce again. He looked healthy finally. He did have a fumble, but he got in the end zone and had some nice production there. And then as Swift goes, I'd play DeAndre Swift, but your emergency guy in the scenario that Swift doesn't play, I think I would go, honestly, who do the Chiefs have? I'd go Clyde Edwards-Helaire in your emergency spot if Swift isn't able to play. The one thing that worries me about CH this season, guys, is that workload that we've seen him get. He's been so effective and we've seen him get those 20-plus touch games, but he's just not getting quite enough of those games for me to be super high on him. This guy clearly has the talent to get it done and be an elite-level fantasy producer, but for the most part, CEH has not seen the amount of touches he deserves. And it's not even a result of Le'Veon Bell being there either. It's just rather that the Chiefs don't really care about running the football because they have Pat Mahomes and can just chuck it down the field 60 yards. Here we go. Pick 3, Michael Thomas, Calvin Ridley, Justin Jefferson, or Deontay Johnson. I think this week, let's see, the Falcons have the Saints. Saints have been playing some really good defense lately, and they've been clamping up some teams, and notably Atlanta really struggled last time, but I think that having some tape on that game in a short turnaround might be beneficial to them. Deontay Johnson, again, I really love Deontay Johnson this season, but against Washington, one of the top defensive ranked passing units in the league, I think he has a bit of a shaky floor, but he always has a great ceiling because he's a playmaker, and he gets a lot of targets in that offense. I think he actually leads the Steelers in targets this season, despite all of the games in time that he's missed. He's never really missed games, but he has left early in a lot of contests this year. Justin Jefferson, though, he needs to be in your lineup. I would say Michael Thomas definitely needs to be in your lineup against the Falcons. So those would be my top 2, and then I think it's just kind of a toss-up between Ridley and Johnson this week. Maybe go Ridley just because of the Julio's a little bit banged up right now, so I think Ridley might see some more targets. Week 13, Sanders or Carson, full PPR. I believe this is Miles Sanders because Chris Carson's running back, so I'm guessing this is probably for your running back 2 spot. Definitely, I think both of these guys have good matchups, but I would go Miles Sanders, and I know a lot of people are panicking on Miles right now, but I've been super high on this guy since day one. I really like Miles Sanders' game. His talent is fantastic, and if the Eagles would just stop turning the football over at such a high clip, and they would actually choose to include the running game in their game plan, I think Miles Sanders could be one of the top backs in fantasy, and his schedule gives him the opportunity to be one of the top guys down the stretch here. It doesn't get better for Miles Sanders than it does this week against Green Bay, so I think that's a very safe route to go there. should I start Deontay or Michael Thomas this week? I love Deontay Johnson, but you got to go Michael Thomas. The floor is much safer there, and they both have pretty nice ceilings. Thank you so much, Denver Sports Central. Really appreciate the support from you. Pick 2, standard, Jefferson, DK, Keenan Allen, or Ridley. So I think for the first spot here, Seattle has the Giants. You got to go with DK Metcalf. He's been so good this season. And then Keenan Allen, I really like. Obviously, every week we know he's going to get those targets from Justin Herbert, but I would be a little bit shied off of starting him if you have other high-level options in your lineups, because rookie quarterbacks against Bill Belichick tend to not do so hot. So Justin Herbert, this guy is clearly one of the top talented rookies we've seen come out of the draft in a long time, but no matter how good you are, if you're a young player and have not seen some high-level defenses, I think you're going to struggle against Bill Belichick's defense. So I would shy away from him a little bit, and I think I might err towards the side of Justin Jefferson. Yeah, James, I love Godwin for the playoffs as well. Tom Brady, Gronk, all these guys in the Bucs offense have some really nice matchups, and I think having a late bye week might actually really help this team. I think that they're going to be able to get back on top for the rest of the season and actually go in strong to the playoffs. So that's a group I really like. They've got great matchups here. I'll read off some of them. Buccaneers down the stretch here in the fantasy playoffs. Weeks 14 through 16 have Minnesota, Atlanta, and Detroit. Those are all terrible secondaries. The Lions are extremely susceptible to the run, so that might be a nice streaming game for Ronald Jones. And there's just a lot to be had in those matchups, so I really like that. Start Miles Sanders or Raheem Mostert, PPR. This is a tough one, but I think I'm still going to go with Miles Sanders. That Green Bay run stop, I'm a Green Bay fan. Our run stop is terrible. We line up 3 small defensive ends that are pass rushers on the D-line, and we have 1 true run stopper on that front. There's not anyone up there that scares me that the Eagles' battered line can't block. So definitely go with Miles Sanders this week. If Doug Peterson has any intelligence, he will run the ball over and over again and give Miles Sanders so many opportunities. So that's a shoo-in for me. He's going to be really good there, in that game, I think. Are we sitting Alvin Kamara this week? I've got Gio Bernard as my other option, or got to work the waivers. You can't sit Alvin Kamara. I know he hasn't had a catch, I believe, since Taysom Hill took over that job. Here, I've got Kamara's stats up for me. Yeah, actually, he's got 1 catch for -2 yards in the last 2 games. But last week, it almost looked like they were resting him. I mean, we saw Latavius Murray get a ridiculous amount of touches against the Broncos, but they were just blowing them out, and that game wasn't a contest from start to finish. Latavius Murray had 19 touches, actually 20 touches, 19 of them being carries for 124 yards and 2 touchdowns against the Broncos last week. So I think that they're sort of resting Kamara in hopes of having a really strong playoff run with all their guys healthy. I know he's listed as questionable for this week, so there might have been some minor thing that dinged him early on in that game that they wanted to get him out of there for. So I definitely think Alvin Kamara can only go up from here. The second Drew Brees walks back on the field, he becomes a top 2 running back in fantasy again, and a guy that I think that is very productive for you guys. So I wouldn't sit him down this week. I think Gio Bernard too. I don't remember who the Bengals are playing. They've got the Dolphins. That's a really tough defense. And with that quarterback play in Cincinnati, I don't think I like starting Bengals this week. All right, what else do we got here? Do I trade Michael Thomas for DeAndre Swift PPR? Kind of had it with Thomas now. So if you're looking for a really high upside RB2 or even a guy who can creep into running back 1 territory, DeAndre Swift is your guy. So if you're needy at running back, that's definitely a move that you could make. I mean, Michael Thomas has not showed any of the flashes of last season, really, other than that Falcons game a couple weeks ago. So he's still going to get his targets and his opportunities, but without Drew Brees there on the field, and if you need to win now, I think you should probably move off of him. There's other options you can go about with. Swift might not play this week, though, so I'd be careful about that. He is still in the concussion protocol, so there might be some risky things going on there, but I think once he returns, he's definitely a high-level starter at running back, and honestly one of the more dependable guys going forward since he's gotten that starting job officially. So which quarterback do I stream this week? Cousins looking like a decent option. Yes, I think Kirk Cousins is a very decent stream this week against the Jags. I really like Thielen and Jefferson in fantasy this week, so obviously if I think they're going to have good days, their quarterback also has to be productive, so that's another thing I really like there. Start Lockett or Jefferson this week. I I think I'd go Justin Jefferson here. Lockett, I really liked the rest of the season, especially with all the attention DK Metcalf is getting. But against the Jags, I think it's just a great opportunity for Jefferson to go out and have some big numbers. How do I replace Will Fuller? So that's another good thing I haven't really covered here on the channel. Will Fuller obviously suspended for the rest of this season and even creeping into next year. I think Will Fuller, right now, I think he's actually wide receiver 5 in fantasy, if I'm not mistaken, and half PPR scoring. Yeah, Will Fuller, wide receiver 5, averaging 14.4 points per game. He's been just about as good of a replacement for Hopkins as the Texans probably ever could have hoped for. And obviously the one thing that was a huge question mark with him was his injuries, but he stayed clear of those this year and was great. So I think you replace him. Honestly, you got to look at your bench depth. Hopefully you've got some wide receiver depth. Go out in your waivers. There's probably some guys there that you can go out and utilize. Lots of leagues, 10-man leagues, even 12-man leagues, have some very under-the-radar guys you can plug in at flex or wide receiver 2 and stream for a week. So I don't know exactly who's out there in your leagues, but I definitely think there's a scenario to replace Fuller, but you're obviously not going to get that same high-end production out of him. Seahawks or Packers defense do you like this week? So Seattle's got New York. I would say go the Seahawks if Daniel Jones doesn't end up playing in that game, because I think that I forget who their backup quarterback was that came in last week. Let's check that out here. But anyways, if Daniel Jones doesn't play, that takes away a whole dimension of their football team. You don't get those quarterback runs and draws out of that game, and they lose a lot of their explosion. I mean, you're not going to really see some of the things we thought we were going to get in this matchup, like some deep balls to Darius Shepard or even some Sterling Sharp production or Shepard production. So I would definitely go with the Seahawks if Danny Dimes doesn't play this week. I think Green Bay has the opportunity to be very opportunistic and be ball hawks against the Carson Wentz errant throws that he's been making. But I think that at the end of the day, they're going to tear up that defense a little bit and have a lot of yards on them. So you're going to hope for some takeaways in that one. Gaskin, Jonathan Taylor, Boyd, or Shepard. If you can only pick one, I think I would go with Jonathan Taylor this week. Sterling Shepard would be a solid option if Daniel Jones was playing, but right now he is not on track to play that game. Jonathan Taylor against Houston, though, really like that matchup. They've been susceptible to the run all year, and I don't think that they are going to do anything crazy against the Colts offense. I think the Colts will probably run that game, especially with Deshaun Watson missing his top option in that offense. I need to pick up a tight end. Oh, what's going on, Pete? I need to pick up a tight end. Anyone out there that might not be on a fantasy team that could do okay these last few weeks? Being a Packer fan, if Robert Tonyan's out there in your leagues, he is definitely a guy that you need to go out and pick up. He's only rostered in 59% of leagues, so if he's out there, that's a great option. Otherwise, Logan Thomas has a tough matchup this week, but in general, he's been a high-level streamer in leagues this year. Otherwise, we've seen some other production out of tight ends here and there that has been pretty good. So there's definitely some ways to go about that. I have a flex problem. I've got either Gio, Debo, Pittman, or Juju non-PPR. What do you think? So standard league here, I think I would end up, my gut reaction to this is go Debo Samuel. The Steelers have the Washington football team this week, which has a very good pass rush, and they're pretty solid on the back end. So I'm a little bit worried about the passing game in Pittsburgh this week. Pittman's hit or miss. He's been pretty good at times, but he's been inconsistent at others and laid some eggs. So I think he might be next year the emerging guy in that offense, but this year I still have my questions about him. So I think I'd go with Debo here. Gio Bernard and the Bengals. I just got a report that Adrian Peterson just said that DeAndre Swift has not been himself since the concussion. So that is not good news for you guys to have DeAndre Swift. But anyways, back to the Bengals. They've got the Dolphins this week. I'm not a big fan of starting Bengals against that Brian Flores-led defense. That's a very solid crew, and they force a lot of turnovers. They have at least one in every game this season. Kamara has been battling a foot injury for 2 to 3 weeks. That's why he's been questionable. Yeah, I believe it was it an ankle or a toe, I think, that he stubbed in that Bucs game, and he came out limping after a couple plays. I actually remember that. Devontae Parker or Debo Samuel this week. I think both of these options are solid. I think end up going Deebo Samuel here. He's riding the hot hand right now in that 49ers offense. He's been fantastic. So I really like Deebo Samuel this week. He's got the Bills. They've been susceptible at times. That defense is not quite the same as it was last week. Yes, Colt McCoy is the new starter for the Giants, I believe, if Danny Dimes is to be absent this week. Is there any news on Josh Jacobs? Not since I last checked, but I will go look that up right now. The latest things I see. Okay, so basically there's nothing out within the last hour or so. But Sports Illustrated put out a article saying that he could be in danger of missing the dream game here against the Jets, which I think is very favorable and a great matchup. Obviously, the Jets are not going to score points in that game. If you want to stream a defense this week, the 32nd ranked Raiders defense might actually be a group to go out and pick up this week. I think that they're going to get some sacks and takeaways because that Jets offense has been awful. In 2 games this season, against the Miami Dolphins, they put up a whopping 3 total points, so not a good group there. How good do you think D-Hop will do against Jalen Ramsey? I agree with James on this one. I'm not thinking he's going to do so hot with Kyler Murray's injury, and he pretty much was taken out of the game as a runner. They didn't use him so much in that aspect last week. Let's check on Murray's numbers. They were significantly down last week, and this kind of plays as well to the thing I was talking about here with Bill Belichick defenses are very good against young quarterbacks, and while Kyler Murray is a budding star right now and a really good fantasy player, he's still in his second year and not a very experienced guy, so that Patriots defense can throw you for a loop there. But last week we only saw Kyler Murray carry the ball 5 times for 31 yards, which is significantly lower, I think, than what most people were hoping for. But yeah, if that shoulder continues to bother Murray, I think that D-Hop's value and his ceiling comes down significantly. We know he's going to get the looks, but 2 weeks in a row here with the top corner. He had Gilmore last week and Ramsey this week. I think that might be a tough one for him. What wide receivers do I start? Amari Cooper, Deontay Johnson, Corey Davis, Jalen Reagor, or Michael Pittman? I think this week I would go, let's see, Dallas has the Ravens. Yeah, I'm not trying to mess with the Cowboys this week. I think, honestly, you might want to go Deontay Johnson in this one. He's got a shaky floor as well, but I think he has the highest ceiling in this game. I just don't see Amari Cooper having a great day on Marlon Humphrey, and that entire the Cowboys offense, I think is going to really struggle against that Ravens front. I mean, they're missing, I don't even know how many guys. It's at least 3 to 4 of their starting guys on that offensive line, and people are just running straight past them and just abusing Andy Dalton back there. So he's not going to have any time to throw. He's going to need a chunk play if he's going to do anything in that matchup. But Deontay Johnson, a little bit of a lower ceiling because of that matchup against the Washington football team, but I still really like his ceiling as always. He's kind of a boom-bust play for me this week. I have Miles Sanders, Aaron Jones as my RB 1 and 2. How are you feeling about them rest of season PPR? I really like that group. That's one of the more favorable matchups, I think, in terms of a fantasy playoff schedule for running backs. We just have to see those offenses get back to using those guys in the passing game and just see Miles Sanders get some more volume in that Eagles offense. I really like him the rest of the season. They both had some relatively low ceilings the last couple weeks, but I think going forward they're going to produce really nicely. And I think playing each other this week are actually both going to have quite nice games. This week only Fitzpatrick or Watson and Ruggs or Mims. Also, what happens to Watson's value with Fuller gone? Okay, this week Fitzpatrick has the Bengals. That's a decent stream. I actually like Ryan Fitzpatrick as a stream quarterback this week. But I think after what we saw, let's see, the Texans have the Colts. We've seen the Titans completely run through that defense, and Green Bay had a pretty nice game against them as well. I think Watson might turn the football over a couple times, but I think ultimately he's still going to be a better producer than Fitzmagic will this week. Love Fitzmagic, but I don't think he's going to be quite as good as Watson because he's still got that rushing value. And I think that even with Fuller gone, Brandon Cooks we can see step up in that offense. Randall Cobb will step up, and I know they've got a young rookie they really like in that offense as well. So, as well as David Johnson, they have opened up his window to return from the injured reserve. He might come back soon, but Duke Johnson is a solid threat out of the backfield as well in the passing game. Oh, and then to answer your other question, I think I would honestly maybe go. That's a tough one. They're playing against each other. Ruggs and Mims, both rookie receivers, a little bit inconsistent, but I think I would probably go with Mims. We haven't seen him go below 60 yards in 3 straight weeks. He hasn't had very many catches, but he's been pretty solid, whereas Henry Ruggs is kind of all over the place. We've seen him here. I'm looking at his stats right now. 6.5 points or fewer in half PPR scoring in like 7 straight weeks, so not a great option there. Excuse me. I think Murray needs season-ending surgery. I think, is he going to get the season-ending surgery? Probably not. I bet he grits the season out and ends up playing and trying to carry that Cardinals team to the playoffs. But does he need it, and should he have some repairing surgery? Probably yes. I think that's definitely a route he needs to go. I love Kyler Murray. He's been one of the more impressive quarterbacks this season and definitely right in the middle of that MVP race. But right now, his shoulder's not right, so he probably needs to have something done whenever it is that they call it quits for him this season. Maybe if you're the front office projecting long-term, this is a little bit of speculation here, nothing really to back this up. Maybe you shut him down for the season. Right now, they've got a decent amount of wins, but maybe you shut it down, get a high draft pick, and come back with your franchise quarterback healthy. Is Booker worth picking up? I'm going to drop Gus. I got Dobbins stashed on the injured reserve. Yeah, that's a great move. Gus Edwards, I really like him as a streaming option, and I think actually a couple of years ago, I won my championship streaming him in my flex. I forget who their starter was at the time, but they went down, so Gus Edwards ended up being the guy late in that season. But Gus Edwards, I think he served his time, and that's J.K. Dobbins' backfield now, and Devontae Booker, is definitely worthwhile picking up here, because if Josh Jacobs misses this week, he's going to have a field day against that Jets defense. Justin Jefferson or Robert Woods this week, I really like both of those guys, but ultimately I think I would end up going with Justin Jefferson. The Jags just don't really have a top corner like the Cardinals do in Patrick Peterson. So at the end of the day, I think that both of these guys have safe floors and nice ceilings. But if you want to look at it from the perspective of defensive talent, there is certainly more in Arizona, even though they do give up a bunch of fancy points and touchdowns in general. So I think I'd go Justin Jefferson by a slim margin there. Should I start Green Bay defense or Los Angeles Rams defense? I'd go with the Rams this week. Those guys are on a hot streak. I know they had a bad game to open up last week, and the 49ers kind of just punched them in the mouth and really threw them for a shocker there. So, but I think they're going to bounce back this week, and they're probably not going to have the best game in the world, because while Kyler Murray is banged up, he is still talented, and that Cardinals offense can't put up points. But I think that's the better route to go this week. Green Bay is going to go up yards. I think they're going to probably be a bend but don't break team and an opportunistic team that picks off Wentz because he has routine turnovers. But I think that's the route you go with the Rams this week. Do you think Chubb and Swift are RB1s the rest of the season? Nick Chubb certainly is a RB1 the rest of this year. We see him get so many touches every week, and his workload is crazy. So I really like that. And then DeAndre Swift, again, super dynamic. I love backs in fantasy that catch the ball and run it efficiently on the ground. So he's definitely that. But I just saw a report literally 5 minutes ago that says DeAndre Swift has not been himself since the concussion, and that was his teammate Adrian Peterson saying that. So that's some big news there, and I would definitely be cautious on that. And some other news for you guys via Jay Glazer here 4 minutes ago. The NFL is reinstating Josh Gordon. So if you guys are hearing that here for the first time, let me know in the comment section below what you guys think about that. I definitely think he's not going to be too relevant in fantasy. I don't even know if he'll hit the field before the fantasy playoffs are up, but that is definitely something that just happened here within the last couple minutes. Here we go. Who should I start? Chubb, Sanders, Elliott, or Monty? Select 2 running backs and wide receivers. He's got Jones, Brown, Hill, and Thielen. Hey, running back spots, man, I think I'm going to have to end up going with Chubb or Sanders. I would definitely remove Elliott from the conversation this week. I don't want anything to do with any of those Dallas offensive players against the Ravens this week. And then I think Montgomery is a solid option as well, very safe floor. But if you want that ceiling play, Sanders against the Packers is a great way to go. And then for your wide receivers, I'm guessing Julio Jones is the Jones you're referring to. He's a bit dinged up, but if he goes, should be solid. But I'd definitely lock A.J. Brown in there against the Browns. And then I would probably start, let's see, who does Tyreek Hill play this week? Denver, yeah, he could have a nice day against Denver. Really, all 4 of those wide receivers are great options, but I think A.J. Brown and Hill are your best bets this week. Best defense for the playoffs schedule: Rams at home versus Patriots. Yeah, the Rams do have, that wasn't really a question, that was a statement. The Rams do have a great playoff schedule, and they're one of the top defenses in the league this year, despite matchup. I mean, they've been so sound. They're getting the football taken away. Jalen Ramsey has played lockup on a lot of teams' number 1 wideouts, so that's a fantastic unit. I think those are some really good players there in LA, and a very, very well-coached group. Hopkins or Calvin Ridley this week? That's a tough one. I think you go Calvin Ridley. I don't love either of these matchups. The Saints defense has been playing very hot lately, but I think Kyler Murray's injury in that Rams matchup and likely shadow coverage from Jalen Ramsey is going to be a tough week for Hopkins with a relatively low ceiling. Do you think Joe Mixon will be back? I don't really know. Let's look up and see. I'll search right now and see if Joe Mixon has any more news out about him since the last time I checked. But I don't really know if they will. I mean, their season is pretty much shot and lost at this point. With Joe Burrow being out, that team is pretty much done for. And I don't see them having much of an upside the rest of the season or reason to play their top guys if they're having injury problems. So I wouldn't be surprised if we don't see him come back. First round playoff questions. So in your flex, you're wondering about J.K. Dobbins, Kareem Hunt, Chase Claypool, or Jefferson. Well, that's tough because I don't have those matchups in front of me. I only have the Week 13 matchups. But I'll just check on each of these guys really quick here. Justin Jefferson in round 1 has Tampa Bay, so that's either a boom or bust game for me. They played really good defense at points this season, and they've been really struggling lately. I think Hunt might be a solid option for you. He's actually listed as questionable right now. He's got Baltimore that week, so another not-so-hot matchup. Claypool, let's see who the Steelers have in Week 14. They've got Buffalo. That's a little bit better. And then your last one is, it was Dobbins, Hunt, Claypool, or Jefferson. So I don't know. I think we'll have to wait and see ultimately how this week plays out. But I think that there's definitely some solid options there. By the way, let me guys know if there's any specific videos you would like me to put out tomorrow. Right now I'm kind of considering doing like a fade type video of guys I would stay away from in your lineups this week. But if you guys have any other ideas that you'd like to see, let me know. Denzel Mims breakout game. Yeah, the Raiders have not been good defensively this year in terms of how many yards they've allowed per game. And they've been very flimsy. So he could have a big game. We've only seen him have 2 or 3, I think 4 at the most catches in his last 3 games. And Denzel Mims has gone over 60 yards in each of those games. Let's see here. In his last 3 games here, he's got 4 for 62, 3 for 71, and 4 for 67. So clearly a guy who gets a lot of yards per catch. And I think that if they have a little bit of stability in that offense, he could put up really nice numbers against the Raiders this week. Do you trust the Ravens defense this week against the Cowboys, even with all their injuries? Yes, I do, Jack. I think that the Ravens defense, we actually saw them do quite a number to Pittsburgh considering how awful their offense was. And I think a thing that people overlook is how much the offense actually has an effect on how your defense plays. So if your offense is turning the ball over at a high clip, if you're punting the ball frequently and have a low time of possession, your defense doesn't get a breather, they don't get time off, and they don't get to sit down and rest. So then I think with how bad that Ravens offense played last week, we saw RG3 turn it over, and we saw them stall out and punt a lot. I mean, they only put up 14 points all game long. I think that defense showed that they have a lot of dependability. So I would definitely trust them against the banged-up Cowboys. Should I drop Gaskin, Dobbins, or Taylor for Gallman? I would hang on to all 3 of your guys. Wayne Gallman is pretty dang solid right now, but if we see Devontae Freeman come back, it's more of a temporary thing, and I think Gaskin, Dobbins, and Taylor are all long-term starters for your team. So I think there's definitely a scenario where you could go out and play Gallman this week, especially if Daniel Jones plays, but other than that, I think I'd stay away from him. Quick note, guys, I'm only going to stream for about 20 more minutes because I've got to go to work here in a little bit, so I'll be doing all the questions I can get covered here from now until then, but just want to let you guys know, is Gaskin a reliable RB2 this week / rest of the season? So that's actually a really great question. Michael, great question there. I think that Gaskin is definitely a reliable player going forward the rest of the season, but I have my question marks about running backs coming back in their first game off of an injury, especially when they landed on the IR, because that means it's significant to some extent. So I definitely think Gaskin can produce this week, but I don't know how many touches he's going to get. It's a good matchup against Cincinnati. That offense can't hang on to the football, and they've got some struggles there of their own. So I think Gaskin will get his work, but in general, I'm a little bit more hesitant on running backs in their first game off of an injury. Should I pick up Jefferson, Cooks, Debo, or Robbie Anderson? Well, if those guys are in your waiver wire, that's crazy. I would definitely pick up Justin Jefferson for sure. And I think that Robbie Anderson's a great guy to go after as well. Honestly, I like all four of those guys. I can't believe those are out on your waiver wire. You must be in a smaller league of some sort. Cooks stepped into that wide receiver one spot in the Texans offense, and Jefferson definitely has been a productive rookie wide receiver. Debo looks great coming off his injury and is playing very high-level football right now, and Teddy Bridgewater loves Robbie Anderson. So I love all four of those guys. I'd say Jefferson and Robbie Anderson would be my top two guys. Should I drop Cam for Cousins or Goff? Yeah. Let's just see. I definitely would drop Cam Newton. I just want to bring up a stat. I don't know what it is exactly off the top of my head, so I'm going to go look at it. Here it is. Cam Newton has 4 passing touchdowns this season. That is terrible. If you combine in his rushing touchdowns, he has 4, 5, 6, 8, 9 rushing touchdowns. So he's got a whopping 13 touchdowns this season. That Pats offense has been terrible. I would definitely look to move off of him. Cousins, I think, is starting to reemerge as a solid starting level quarterback. He might be a little bit more on the lower end of things, but he is still a solid guy. And then Goff, I really like that Rams offense as well. So Goff is a guy you could go for. Let's look at the rest of the season schedules here. Goff has the Patriots, the Jets, and Seattle. Those are great playoff games. I think I would look to go add Jared Goff because I know Minnesota has some tough matchups. So Jared Goff, definitely a guy who this week might not be so hot, but I think that, or actually he should be pretty good against the Cardinals. I was thinking of the other side of that game. So I would definitely go out and try and add Goff. I need to win this week. Do you have any tips? So in must-win situations, you really have to look at the team you're playing against, and you have to kind of evaluate, does that team have a high ceiling or a high floor? And if the answer is that the team you're going against has a very high ceiling, then you kind of have to roll the dice a little bit and play some guys who are a little bit more risky, but have the potential to go off and have huge games. And you got to kind of play the numbers in that one. Whereas if they have a high floor, you need to go out and play some more consistent players and guys that you can trust to go out and get some very consistent lineup numbers and be very dependable pieces. So I would definitely try and look at matchups as well. Try and get your guys out there with the best matchups because those are the guys that are the most likely to have great games. So that would be my advice to you for that. Sterling Shepard or CeeDee Lamb, I would go with, that's a tough one, honestly. CeeDee Lamb's got a tough matchup against the Ravens, and he is playing out of the slot right now for the Dallas offense. We saw Deontay Johnson do all right in that role last week against the Ravens. And then Sterling Shepard, though, I would love this matchup if they knew for a fact they were going to have Daniel Jones this week, but with some question marks there, I'm not so sure that we can trust Sterling Shepard this week. So I think, honestly, I would probably go. That's a really tough one. I think I go with CeeDee Lamb. They're going to get blown out, so you know they're going to be passing the ball. But if Daniel Jones ends up playing, I would go Sterling Shepard. I don't know why I keep saying Sterling Sharp. Choose 2 running backs, 2 wide receivers, and a flex to start this week. Derrick Henry, Austin Eckler, Miles Sanders, Calvin Ridley, McLaurin, and A.J. Brown. At wide receiver, definitely go McLaurin and A.J. Brown. I really like both of their ceilings this week. Brown against the Browns, I think, has a really nice shot there. And then McLaurin, as long as the Washington football team O-line can hold up against the pass rush, I think will have a very productive game because the secondary is the weakness of that team in Pittsburgh. And then I definitely think as well, you go you got to go Henry and Eckler at running backs. I really like Miles Sanders this week, but what I saw from Austin Eckler was really great last week, despite not really having too many yards. Eckler had 14 carries for 44 yards. Okay, not a great clip on the ground, but there is the volume there, which you love to see. The part of this game I really loved about Austin Eckler was 11 receptions for 85 yards, basically putting up like low-end wide receiver 1 to wide receiver 2 numbers there at in PPR leagues there with those 11 catches, which was ridiculous. So Austin Eckler officially back for me. I love him the rest of the season in fantasy, and despite how much I like Miles Sanders' matchup against Green Bay, I definitely think that Eckler is the guy that deserves the nod. Whether or not I get into the playoffs is determined this week. Help me pick my lineup: 2 running backs, 2 wide receivers, and a flex. You've got Kamara, Jonathan Taylor, Eckler, Miles Sanders, and then you've got Thielen and Metcalf and Kupp. So it's a little bit risky, and I know a lot of people are really freaking out about Alvin Kamara right now, but I have a really tough time sitting him down. I like all 4 of your running backs that you've got on your team there, but I think you have to start Kamara this week. The hope for me this week against the Falcons is that they've taken a look at some film. They've analyzed Taysom Hill's game. He's got 2 games on footage right now, so they can take a look at it, take away that option game for the quarterback, and make him stay contained and pass out of the pocket. And if they can do that, he's definitely going to have to check down to Kamara some more. I love Austin Eckler in that lineup as well, and Miles Sanders is a great option against Green Bay. And then at your wide receiver spots, I would go Thielen against the Jags and Metcalf against the Giants. Those are 2 top-level fantasy producers as well, and I even like Kupp a lot as well, but I think that those 2 other wideouts are a bit better. Claypool, J.K. Dobbins, or Debo for flex this week. I think I would be careful with J.K. Dobbins this week. I talked about a little bit earlier on the stream here how I really like him the rest of the season if he shows us again that he gets those leading carries in that backfield. I like Claypool as well the rest of the season, but this week against Washington is a bit of a risky matchup, and I really like Debo against the 49ers matchup. The Bills have not been as good of a defense as we expected this year, so I really like Debo there, and he had a great season as a rookie. He gets it done on the ground. He gets jet sweeps and end arounds, so he's a guy I really like there. I wouldn't trust anything on the Patriots offense at all. Yeah, I agree with you there, man. Undisputed Queso. They're just awful offensively. They don't have personnel. They don't have the scheme right now. The things in that offense just aren't meshing, and the talent level is Cam Newton and a bunch of incompetent skill players, honestly. I mean, their wide receivers, N'Keal Harry, unfortunately looks like a bust right now, and they just don't really have any other talent there. Those 2 tight ends they drafted this offseason, not really doing too much in that offense either. So it's kind of a crapshoot right now for that Pats offense. I believe this was okay. So you said you needed the win this week, and he has a lot of Tampa Bay and Carolina players. That's great. So that means he's probably resorting to a lot of backups in his lineup. So I think that helps your chances this week. Calvin Ridley, Deontay, Debo, pick one. I think you got to go with Calvin Ridley this week. I really like Debo Samuel and Deontay Johnson, but Deontay's matchup scares me off of him a little bit. I think he has a high ceiling as always, but a lower floor. Debo, I think, is just a really safe play and the top option at wide receiver in that 49ers offense. And I like the matchup, but I think the quarterback play ultimately moves him below Ridley for me. Should I pick up Josh Gordon? If you're in a deeper league and you can afford to stash away a player like Josh Gordon, then I think it's a viable option to go about. So something you guys could do if you're looking to pick up a guy who potentially might be worth something, but I think a lot of you guys will admit who have picked up Antonio Brown and expected him to be a great player. You went out and traded for him. That was something that was a bit of a underwhelming result. So I wouldn't have my expectations too high for Josh Gordon. I think he's definitely someone that could potentially be a flex level player, maybe down the stretch of the season, but I don't think he's going to get integrated into that Seattle offense too fast, and I think he might be a bit of a clunky guy. So not something I would really risk too much investment into. Flex this week, Miles Sanders or Calvin Ridley. I'd go with Miles Sanders against Green Bay this week. I love the matchup. I think that he should get 20-plus touches if Doug Peterson is doing things right this week, and I think that he's going to put up some very big numbers. So He's definitely got the opportunity. I'm a Green Bay fan. I think I said this earlier on the stream, but we literally start 3 pass rushing defensive ends on our D-line and only 1 true nose tackle to stop the run lane. So there's stuff everywhere to go and run. So great opportunity for Miles this week. Choose between the 2 running backs and a flex. Antonio Gibson, Raheem Mostert, Calvin Ridley, and Miles Sanders. I think the odd man out for me, just immediately off the top of my head here, Antonio Gibson is the guy with the worst matchup against Pittsburgh this week, so I would immediately shy off of him. Calvin Ridley, I think, has a similarly tough matchup against the Saints, but overall, I like his value slightly more. Gibson's been fantastic, though, the last few weeks, and I think that for some people, it's going to be hard to sit him. But against the Pittsburgh Steelers, it's probably the wise thing to do, but the rest of the season, he is a great lineup piece. Who should I start? Sanders, Elliott, or I think I already answered that question. If you didn't end up hearing me, I ended up going with Chubb and Sanders, and then I went with A.J. Brown and Tyreek Hill. But I also said you could sub in Adam Thielen. I have Henry, Gurley, Carson, Lockett, Jones, and DeAndre Hopkins. Pick 2 running backs and 2 flexes. Or 2 wide receivers and 1 flex. I think your running backs this week have to go Carson and Henry. Derrick Henry is my top running back the rest of this fantasy season, and Chris Carson has a great matchup against the Giants. And then when you look at Tyler Lockett and Julio Jones, those are probably the top guys. Well, okay, you need 3 more players. So I'd say start the 3 wide receivers if they all end up playing, and sit down Gurley against the Saints, because that's a brutal matchup. Oh, you didn't hear it. Let me know if you didn't hear it again, and I'll get back to you, man. But I answered it twice, so hopefully you heard it one of those times. But I'll do it one more time just in case you didn't. Is Cam Akers worth picking up? So if you're in a deeper league, I think Cam Akers definitely has some value on teams, and he was a guy I was pretty darn excited about coming into this season. I thought he would have a very nice value and a very clear shot into a workhorse running back role in that Rams offense. And I expected him to kind of pick up where Todd Gurley left off at last season. And clearly that's been a committee, and that was not the case at all. Thankfully, Cam Akers' draft stock wasn't too high, so it wasn't too much of a bust. But at this point, we've been seeing him get integrated a little bit more into that offense. So I think Cam Akers, if you're in a deeper 12-man league, might be worth your ad. Choose 2 running backs and a flex. Antonio Gibson. Oh, I think I answered this one already. If not, I'll just get back to it one more time. Gibson, Mostert, Ridley, and Sanders. Gibson's my odd man out with that tough matchup against Pittsburgh. Do I think Miles Sanders can turn it around? Absolutely. I think Miles Sanders going forward, he's got some pretty darn good fantasy matchups here in the playoffs, and I think this week he should really get back on track against the Packers. I've been high on Miles Sanders all season. It's fair if he does bad this week to truly hit the panic button on him because the matchup is so good. So if he doesn't produce this week, then you guys can freak out and be worried about him. But for right now, I think he's still a fine option. Where do I rank CMC for the playoffs? Under Henry and Cook, ? So I'll actually be coming out with my fantasy playoff rankings for every single position next week. I'm going to be grinding out content for you guys and trying my hardest to get you guys to the playoffs winners and get you guys some championships. I would love nothing more than to see a ton of you guys win your leagues. So, CMC, I've got Henry right now as my RB1 for the rest of the season. His matchups are great. He played a phenomenal game last week, and he was very good against the Ravens as well. And then I think Cook definitely also gets a little bit of a nudge in front of him. I had CMC ranked around 7 or 8, I believe, last time, and my rankings were when he was out with an injury. So he's definitely going to come up the list a little bit, and if we see him come back on the field, and right now they're hoping to actually have that happen after this bye week, I think he'll be under those guys still, but probably in my top 4 to 5 guys for sure. He might even get an edge over Aaron Jones, I think, because we saw CMC put up some really darn good games this season when he's been on the field. Yeah, Pittman versus the Texans with no Bradley Roby, or Amari versus the Ravens. And yeah, I saw the news about AP saying that Swift hasn't been the same, which is really unfortunate because DeAndre Swift was a guy I was super excited about this season. And since he got that starting job, he was fantastic. But to answer your question, I think Amari versus the Ravens is extremely risky, but Pittman has been really hit or miss. I think it's warranted if you went with Pittman. I think there's definitely a world out there where he has a really nice game. but I have some questions about him, and his consistency is all over the place. So I'm a little bit worried about that, but I think you could definitely start him over Cooper if you wanted, because I think against Marlon Humphrey, that's going to be a pretty dang tough game. Kamara or Gallman this week? I mean, I've been saying this all stream. I hate sitting Alvin Kamara, and I know that right now he's been really underwhelming the last 2 weeks, but I think we just have to bet on the production we've seen from him in terms of the rest of the season prior to this point. I think as soon as Drew Brees walks onto that field, he's going to go back to a top 2 running back, but right now, I guess in a standard league, maybe I could see where you might want to start Gallman more than him, but I think Kamara is just too valuable of an asset to sit on your bench. And then it would really suck if he ended up getting his receiving game back and ended up going off for a huge week and you had Gallman in. So Justin Jefferson or Adam Thielen this week, that's a tough one. Both of those guys have been phenomenal all season long. I think in terms of what we see in the red zone, Adam Thielen has been great. And I think in terms of yardage, we've seen Jefferson do a little bit more work. So I don't know. Both of those guys are really similar. I had them really dang close in my rankings the last time I came out with that video. I think definitely projecting the future, Justin Jefferson is going to be the top dog, probably moving into next season already. But maybe right now, Adam Thielen might be the guy that Kirk trusts slightly more. Josh Allen or Lamar Jackson. I believe I had Lamar ranked, around 7 or 8 in my last quarterbacks ranking video that I did. And I think I had Josh Allen somewhere around 6 or 7. I think I'd go Lamar, though, if he's able to come back healthy for the playoff schedule in terms of just that sense. I think Lamar has some really great matchups here. I've been talking about this for a couple weeks now. The Ravens here have Cleveland, Jacksonville, and New York the rest of the season. Those are all great matchups. I think Lamar can thrive in all those games. And Josh Allen and the Bills have some slightly tougher games, which I think is what gives Jackson the edge for me this season, even though he hasn't been quite up to standard with where you guys picked him at. A couple more questions here, and then I got to head out. What's the outlook on Dalvin? Should I look for a replacement? I don't think so. Definitely make sure you can go out and get Alexander Madison for your teams, but if Dalvin Cook's healthy and playing, he's fantastic. Justin Tucker or Tyler Bass? I can't believe I'm answering a kicker question. I tend not to play fantasy with kickers. My favorite guy is Young Hoku, of course, but I think Justin Tucker is probably one of the better kickers in the league, and if that Ravens offense has Lamar, he's probably going to put up some nice points. Do you still think Thielen can be a high to mid wide receiver 2 rest of the season? Yes, I do. I think Adam Thielen is one of the guys that Kirk Cousins leans on heavily to be one of the top players in that offense, and he's probably the most trusted target in that offense for Kirk. So I really like Adam Thielen the rest of the season. He's definitely a high level to mid level wide receiver 2. Thoughts on Madden this year? Madden's pretty garbage. In terms of franchise and stuff, they haven't changed much stuff. Odd question, but thank you, Eric, for dropping that in the chat. Even though this is a fantasy channel, I love to play Madden, even though it's a really bad game. Russ or Tannehill this week? Russ has the Giants, and Tannehill has Tennessee. Help me out. You go to the Browns. I think Russ, again, I don't think you sit down Russ for Tannehill. I think you got to play Russell Wilson. Tannehill's got a great matchup, and they can definitely beat those defensive backs in Cleveland, but I wouldn't sit down Russell Wilson. Chubb, Gibson, Swift, Montgomery, Taylor, pick 3 for week 13 and 3 for rest of season. If Swift gets back to himself, he definitely makes the top 3 on that list, and I think Chubb and Gibson, so right in order there. Those are my guys for the rest of the season that I'd pick. In terms of this week, though, Swift, Adrian Peterson said, is not looking like himself right now, so you probably got to kick him out of there. Gibson, really tough matchup against Pittsburgh this week. Probably got to kick him out of there. So you're left with Chubb and Montgomery and Taylor this week. I think I'd go with. I really wish DeAndre Swift was healthy right now, but it's sounding like that's not the case. How do I feel about Chris Carson the rest of the season? I love Chris Carson. He has been a very phenomenal player when he's healthy and on the field. We see him get a high level of work, and I think that he's a guy you can depend on in your leagues, especially standard leagues. I really like Chris Carson, but he does a lot of work in the passing game as well. So great option there in Chris Carson. What should I do with Michael Thomas? Start him. He's got some pretty good matchups the rest of the season, unless you've got some fantastic and elite level players on your team to start over him. I think that he's a guy that deserves to be started because that Saints schedule is pretty darn easy. I have Hines, Montgomery, Swift, and Dobbins. I need a flex, so 3 of them. I'd put Swift in this list if he plays, but I just talked about how Adrian Peterson said he's not himself right now. Montgomery gets in there because Detroit is the worst team against the run in the NFL this year. And then I think Hines should have a pretty safe day against the Texans, but nothing crazy. Should I trade Dalvin Cook for Gibson and McLaurin? I really like hanging on to your top running backs, so I think that you should probably hang on to Cook in that situation. Also, thoughts on Brandon Cooks. His value is up right now, moving into that number 1 spot in that Texans offense. I think he definitely has some great value, so that's where I'd go with that one. Do you think Deshaun Watson can help keep fantasy relevant rest of the season? Yeah, he'll certainly be fantasy relevant. Will he take a slight hit? I think so. Without Will Fuller, I think that he's going to take a little bit of a dip, at least in the first couple of weeks, to see who he can really trust and rely on. But Cobb and Cooks are certainly guys he can get it done with, and with his legs, he's a very good player as well. So Kyler or Herbert? Herbert for the rest of the season. Kyler Murray was my second-ranked quarterback a couple weeks ago, but since that AC joint sprain, definitely someone I'm looking to find a replacement option for if you guys have an elite-level backup like Herbert. What's up, Time Turner? Welcome to the stream here. We're getting things wrapped up here, though. I got to head out to work here in just a minute. But thanks for joining in on the stream, so I'll answer your question quick. And one more. What do you think about Amari Cooper and D-Hop rest of the season? I think the Cowboys' offense is kind of a mess right now this week, especially against Baltimore. Not a guy I want to start. And D-Hop, I love DeAndre Hopkins. Him and Murray have been fantastic all year long. But I think that's definitely something that comes down a little bit with that AC joint sprain. And I think that you have to manage your expectations a little bit with those two. And then Ravens defense or Dolphins this week. I'm going to go with Ravens against, man, that's really tough. I think I'd actually go with Miami. They've got a turnover in every game this year. And against that Cincinnati Bengals offense without Joe Burrow, that's a really good game for the Dolphins. I think they're going to have a handful of takeaways in that game. Lamar or Herbert this week, what do I think? John Harbaugh is actually not saying whether or not Lamar is going to play this week, so I think you got to be just safe and put Herbert in for now until we hear more. It's not a guarantee whether or not Lamar will play at all this week. So, Chef Boyardee, I'll answer your question as long as I think it's the one that you just posted here after that. Brandon Cooks or Calvin Ridley this week. I think you got to go with Calvin Ridley until we see what Brandon Cooks does in that number 1 slot in that offense. But I definitely think that is still both of those guys are high-level players. And Brandon Cooks is a guy who I think saw a huge spike in value since Will Fuller is going to be gone. But this week, go Ridley. Brandon Cooks against the Indianapolis Colts might not be the highest upside game, so that's a little bit risky, and I'd look to stay away from that one. And then last question here, last 2 questions from Dave McKnight and Travis Elkins. Do I start Michael Thomas and Julio Jones together or Michael Thomas and Claypool instead in standard leagues? So I would start MT and Julio if it looks like Julio is going to play this week. Obviously, that's something that has to be monitored here in the coming days here before that game plays. But I definitely think if they end up going, Julio Jones is your option to go because Claypool against Washington is not a great matchup. And then in standard league, pick 2 running backs for Dave McKnight, Jacobs, Sanders, Swift, and Hines. I'd go with Jacobs and Sanders if Jacobs plays. It's sounding like everything is good and that he should play this week. So I think that should be a solid option for you there. And then I really like Sanders against the Packers. But if Jacobs doesn't play for some reason, I think I'd go with Naheem Hines because DeAndre Swift had some bad news come out about him a couple minutes ago regarding his concussion and health. So Time Turner, yes, I will do. Sorry, I keep saying I'm going to wrap things up here, and then I see some more questions. Time Turner, I will do a ton of Dynasty videos this offseason. I'm going to be talking about all of the players coming into the draft next year, how I see guys' value rising and falling after the season's over, and whatnot. So I'm going to be doing a ton of projection-type videos. I'm going to be doing a ton of prospective rankings and whatnot. So lots of Dynasty-style videos coming out this season. No problem, Dave McKnight. Thanks for stopping around here on the stream. Glad to have you here on the channel. Last question, Calvin Ridley, Deontay Johnson, or Benny Snell. This week, I'd go with Calvin Ridley just because the tough matchup for the Steelers. So thank you guys so much for tuning in to today's stream. I really enjoy doing things like this and answering your guys' questions. So thank you guys so much for stopping by, and I will see you guys next time. So later. Peace out.